Les Hallucinations du Baron de Munchausen, released as The Hallucinations of Baron Munchausen, or Baron Munchausen's Dream in English, is a French horror comedy trick film written, directed, and edited by Georges Méliès, with sets by Gerald Claudel. Released in 1911, it was very loosely inspired by the famous satirical character Baron Munchausen. Its actors are uncredited, which was fairly common for the time, though becoming a bit less so as the industry advanced. With a runtime of 11 minutes, it's silent, and I would classify it as appropriate for ages 7 and up due to some very mild violence and potentially frightening imagery. The character of Baron Munchausen was created by the 18th century German author Rudolf Erich Raspe, and first appeared in his 1785 collection of tall tales, Baron Munchausen's narrative of his marvelous travels and campaigns. An over-the-top blowhard who spins these fantastical yarns about his exploits, he's a comedic character, with the works that feature him utilizing absurdism and social satire. A decided fan of Raspa's, Méliès clearly wanted to play around with this character, but chose to do so in an original story that truthfully bears little resemblance to Raspa's work. There's no real social commentary or satire to be found. This, in and of itself, isn't that odd, though, as Baron Munchausen has been wildly popular for centuries, and various creatives have co-opted him over the years. He's appeared in everything from comic books to sci-fi novels, and was even referenced in Nietzsche's philosophical treatise, Beyond Good and Evil. Now, to understand this film's production, one must first understand that the 1910s were a time of significant personal and professional strife for Georges Méliès. Once one of the most beloved and successful directors in the industry, his popularity with general audiences was on the decline. One reason for this was that people seemed to be growing tired of his increasingly repetitive premises and gags. If you follow Méliès' career closely, you will notice several recurring plots, motifs, and jokes, which by the end of his career had grown fairly stale. To make matters worse, the film industry was evolving without him, making his signature short, gag-focused trick films appear a bit archaic. In his personal life, Méliès was not faring much better. He had put his brother Gaston in charge of managing the American branch of his production company's Star Film Company, as well as his finances, and Gaston managed both abysmally. In one particularly foolish venture, Gaston took a crew of 20 people along on a family vacation, all under the pretense that they would go to the Asian Pacific and film a variety of quote-unquote exotic locations, which he would then release as documentary footage. Unfortunately, a large percentage of the film reels he sent back to Georges were so damaged they were totally unusable, and what remained was essentially pointless B-roll. Gaston had also made several of his own films, none of which were successful, and mismanaged the American branch of Star Film Company so notably it had to be sold to Vitagraph Studios. Tens of thousands of dollars poorer, Georges never spoke to his brother again. And compounding these professional and financial hardships was the prolonged illness of Georges' wife, Eugenie, as well as global instability that would, in a few short years, culminate into World War I. With little hope left, Méliès made what would prove to be a life-ruining deal, borrowing a large sum of money from the French producer Charles Pathé. In exchange, he would make several films for Pathé Frères, with the company retaining exclusive distribution and final editing rights. He also handed Pathé the deed to his home and studio as collateral. After the death of Eugenie in May of 1913, and the onset of World War I, Méliès fled Paris with his children, failing to uphold his end of the deal with Pathé, who, after the war, seized Méliès' home and studio. Enraged and desperate, Méliès lit his studio on fire as revenge, destroying countless sets, costumes, and reels of film. The Hallucinations of Baron Munchausen is one of the films Méliès produced for Pathé Frères. While several of his trademarks are evident, including a story centering around a nightmare, several aspects of this film hint at Pathé's involvement, including a shot change from a medium close-up to full shot, something Méliès was just not wont to do. Additionally, the film lacks Méliès' signature rapid-fire pacing, with several scenes being dragged out in what seems like an effort to extend the runtime, something for which Méliès had never shown any concern. The effects of the film were, as to be expected from any Méliès picture, still elaborate, including pyrotechnics, puppetry, substitution splices, and stage machinery. Also, a classic stage trick was employed in this film for when the Baron looks at his own reflection. Rather than just using a real mirror, which could have reflected things like crew and equipment, a double stood opposite the main actor, mimicking his movements in order to create the illusion of a reflection. Sadly, we don't know if Pathé Frères even released this film. All we do know is that it was eventually screened in cinemas in 1943 by the exhibitor Andrii Robert, who would later donate his copy of the print to Méliès' surviving family. Following a lavish dinner party, the drunken Baron Munchausen is led to his bedchambers, where he is quickly plunged into a surreal series of dreams that include living statues, demons, and a spider woman. I adore a lot of Georges Méliès' work. A Trip to the Moon, Cinderella, Bluebeard, those are some of my favorite films from the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I've spoken at length in many of my reviews about just how crucial he was to cinema as a whole. Movies would not be what they are today without him. But sadly, I can also see why his career petered out. Special effects alone, even in a time when movies were still a novelty, cannot always resuscitate a story that's been done to death, especially when set effects are themselves repetitions. Méliès loved himself some trick films about wacky dreams and nightmares. I've reviewed several just on this channel, including A Nightmare and The Raj's Dream, and I can only imagine he had some repeat viewers who'd begun to think, I've seen this before. Like, The Hallucinations of Baron Munchausen is longer and more technologically advanced than A Nightmare, which came out a whole 15 years earlier, all the way back in 1896. But otherwise, it's more or less the same movie. The staging is even similar. When I watched this, I wondered, was Méliès worn down by creative fatigue at this point? Or did Pathé stifle him? Was he simply trying to meet a quota? I mean, Méliès made over 500 films. I want that to be clear. So if the answer was yes to any of these questions, I don't think I could rightfully blame him, especially not while knowing he was being forced to work under someone for the first time in his career, all while dealing with serious financial and personal hardship. I don't hold it against him, but that also doesn't exonerate the film. Now, I'm not saying that this film is some sort of irredeemable pile of garbage, or that there isn't an ounce of creativity to be found here. It's not true. The Baron's actor, for example, is good. He clearly was having a blast, and his reflection double does a pretty serviceable job during the mirror gag. Some of the extras, like the Spider Woman, could have been a little more lively, a little sillier, but the effects do enough of the heavy lifting that you don't necessarily notice their affect unless you really pay attention. Speaking of effects, on all things technical, I mean, it's Méliès. This film more than holds its ground with top-notch editing and special effects. And you cannot go wrong with the puppetry and props and stage mechanics on display here. The Baron's ordeal in hell, the cannon that shoots right past his head, the moon that turns into a silly elephant, it's all fantastic, and further enhanced by Claudel's sets, which are so well painted and diverse. So, I'm sort of stuck in this conundrum, because what do you get when you have a film that you've seen before several times by the same creator in a newer, nicer coat of paint? As such, I am going to give The Hallucinations of Baron Munchausen a 2.5 out of 5. In isolation, it is a treat to look at with some funny little gags, and it might have been closer to a 3 due to its technical competence if cinema could exist in a vacuum, but it's just too similar to Méliès' prior work, making even a first viewing feel a bit like a rewatch for me. Still, I don't think this film is necessarily a waste of time. There are definitely people who would get something from it, especially if they're not as familiar with Méliès' body of work. I would recommend it to Méliès completionists because it's interesting to see what a Méliès film looks like when it's produced by someone else, as well as fans of surreal slapstick and early special effects. It's not bad, just average. A sign of a career coming to a close. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be very appreciated. You can find my other reviews on this channel, starting all the way back with my review of the first horror film ever made in 1896. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Letterboxd, and Instagram at Under the Fleapit. If you like what I do and want to support the channel, my Ko-fi donation page and Patreon will both be linked in the description of this video. Until next time, this has been Under the Fleapit. Stay spooky!